Okay, Councillor Maxted as chair, you can start the meeting now.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Eastbourne Borough Council Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Robin Maxted and I chair this committee. This meeting is being held remotely and broadcast live. For those participating in the meeting or watching on the live stream, please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. Hopefully we won't, but they do happen occasionally. I will ask officers to introduce themselves at the start of their reports or before speaking. And just a few quick reminders before we start. Please can I ask everyone to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and ensure mobile phones are switched off or certainly on mute. If you have connectivity issues, you may find it helpful to turn your camera off when not speaking. Please can all councillors and officers clearly state their name each time they speak so that it is clear who is speaking, especially to any members of the public watching. And please indicate when you have finished so that I know I can move on. And also if you have raised your hand, please can ensure that your hand is lowered after speaking. Finally, if any councillor wishes to speak, please use the raised hand. Sorry, I was ahead of myself there, and I can see you, and I will call you to speak in turn. Thank you, and I'll now take agenda items 1 and 2 together. That's introductions, apologies, and declarations of interest. And I've received one apology from Councillor Helen Burton. No other apologies. So can I now ask my fellow committee members to introduce themselves in turn via a roll call and declare if you have an interest in any item on the agenda, and if so, to state the nature of that declaration. But please also confirm if you have no interest to declare on any of the items on the agenda. So first we'll go to Councillor Chowdhury. Councillor Chowdhury.
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't think Councillor Chowdhury's managed to join by phone yet. We could maybe try at the end of the roll call.
Okay, thanks very much. Next is Councillor Metcalfe. You're muted, Councillor Metcalfe.
Good evening. Thank you very much. It's Councillor Paul Metcalfe, Sovereign Ward, and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Mia.
Good evening, everyone and Chairman. My name is Councillor Mia of Langley Ward, and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you, Councillor Mia. Councillor Morris.
Good evening, it's Councillor Amanda Morris. I have no interest to declare. I'm Deputy Chair and Councillor of Alta.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Barry Taylor in Meads up here, and I have no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll try Councillor Chowdhury one more time. Councillor Chowdhury, can you hear?
I'm sorry, Chair. I think he's still trying to come in by phone.
Okay. Oh, perhaps you could let me know if he's able to join us at some time.
I will.
I'd also like at this point to welcome Ben Sheriff and Paul Thomas, who are joining us from Deloitte and will be addressing the committee in a little while. I'll now take agenda item 3, which is approval of the minutes of the last meeting. So I'll ask councillors, do you wish me to sign the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on 26th of November 2020 as a correct record? I'll assume that's okay unless anyone wishes to speak against it. No, thank you very much. So the minutes have been approved. Agenda item 4, questions by members of the public. I don't think we have any. Can I just confirm that, Elaine?
Yes, Chair, we have had no questions from members of the public.
Thank you. As agenda item 5, urgent items of business, there are no items to be considered. Now I'll take agenda item 6, the right to address the meeting. And as far as I'm aware, there have been no requests made to address the meeting. So that brings us swiftly on to agenda item 7 regarding the external audits for 2018-19. So I hope that everyone's received yesterday's emailed copy of the letter we received from Deloitte, which I understand is Deloitte's update submission for this agenda item. And as I said earlier, we have Ben Sheriff with us today from Deloitte. Before I ask him to present his update, can I ask if our Chief Finance Officer or Deputy Chief Finance Officer would like to comment?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. Can I just invite my colleague Ola to introduce the paper before handing over to Mr. Sheriff, please?
Thank you, Mira. Thank you, Chair. I'm Ola Wolabi, Deputy Chief Finance Officer. Thanks for the opportunity to come and present the update in terms of where we are with the 18-19 account to you. Looking at the minutes, when we provided the committee with an update in November, what we agreed then is that there might be a special meeting before the March meeting, just to resolve one or two issues. The discussion then is that we've got one or two outstanding issues relating to ICE accounting, which is the group account, relating to valuation of properties, and another valuation of properties as well. Since then, we have been having discussion with auditors. We have provided them with our thinking, the relevant journals that are required to be able to put the highs to bed. However, because we haven't made significant progress as planned, we were unable to have that special meeting. However, we escalated the issue to a senior partner in Deloitte, Mr. Craig Wilson. So on the 10th of February, the Chief Executive, Rob, the Chief Finance Officer, Omira, myself, met with Deloitte, and that we met with Ben and Mr. Craig Wilson. The main reason for that is just to highlight the slow progress of the audit and some of those main issues that we've been facing. Rob and Omira made it clear to Deloitte then to say actually members who are not happy, and this has to be addressed as soon as possible. I think Deloitte responded in terms of issues they were facing as a result of lack of resources and the impact of COVID-19. However, they agreed to look into urgent resources to be able to put the 18-19 to bed. In addition to that, from now on, we agree having a monthly monitoring meeting to start monitoring the progress of all those accounts. Few days after that, Ben got in touch with us, asking us to provide them with the latest financial statement, which for them to review. And after that review, we should be able to come to this committee with the final I-60. That account, I believe, is still currently going through their reviews at the moment. However, Ben has provided the committee with a one-pager which detail where we are and going forward, what we need to do. Can I use this opportunity to invite Ben to present his letter? Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Yes, please. Yes, Ben, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. So when we had presented our paper before on covered in our ICT60 report the key areas of audit risk and focus with some open items upon a couple of them. And this page just sets out confirmation of the closure of the items that had been there as outstanding and open upon them. So with respect of ICE, in the paper table that we'd had, draft figures that we discussed and had commented on in terms of what we had done, the remaining queries about those have since been resolved. and the position that was set out there is reflected in the accounts with very minor differences. So with a net effect of income for the year of 0.8 million, so effectively a 1.2 million reduction compared to the draft accounts income and reserves. With respect to the property valuations and additions accounting around the HRA housing stock, at the time of the report, there had been an adjustment in respect of correction of an accounting policy, but because the effect of that on prior years as well was also material, we'd agreed with management that should be adjusted through restatement of the comparatives as well, and that has been that's now agreed, and that is in the updated draft accounts we've received. And we had some specific queries on valuations of individual properties where additional information has been provided, or we have agreed that whilst at one end or another of the range of reasonable answers for the valuation, you are within the reasonable range at March 19, and therefore no issue arises from them. As Ola says, we've received an updated set of the accounts, which we have had someone checking through and have been also putting through our quality assurance processes. We've had a number of comments on that we have fed back, but I think should all be of a mechanical nature for the finance team to address and to put through. And once that's resolved, we should be in a position to sign for those accounts.
Very good. Thanks very much, Ben. That's really good news. It sounds as though we've finally got there, and thank you all for the efforts that you've made to achieve that. So I'm assuming, I know risky, but I'm assuming from what you're saying that that Deloitte is going to be in a position within the next month or so to come back to us and present the audit on 2018-19. Would that be reasonable to expect, Ben?
Yes, that would. Clearly, we as I've said our note, we'd expect to issue a cleared down ISA 260 report. There will be a couple of movements from the draft seen in terms of findings at the end of it, which may be for discussion, but actually on all of the substantive matters, so in respect of the ICE transaction, property valuations, pensions, and so on, the position that's been set out in the November papers remains the same. So I don't think there is very much to report to that committee in terms of actual discussion, but clearly as a process, it's appropriate to do.
Yeah, I think it is something that we would want to happen. I think, Ben. So it's just to warn. Either I will be repeating myself, or we will be taking much as read, and perhaps we will try and just flag what has been said previously and where there's a change. I don't know, Chair, whether it would be helpful if what we sometimes do is flag that in red in a copy, but that might be better to circulate privately rather than being the public version and just having the clean copy without the changes to the public version. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Well, maybe we could get back to discussing this maybe at the end of item 9, then, when we've gone through the next two years accounts. So thank you very much, Ola and Ben, for that. I'll now invite questions and comments from other committee members. Anybody want to raise anything with either Ola or Ben? No, everybody seems to be quite happy with that, so that's good. Yeah, so that's very positive. Right now then, so I think that takes us on to agenda item 8, which I think is again over to you, Ben, for a verbal report on the accounts 2019-20.
Yeah. So, as I said in the last committee, in terms of our resourcing, scheduling for January and February in particular is not possible. We have staff lined up from the middle of this month to begin on sequence of audits. We have to come of 1920 and then going into 2021, and so to move those forward. So whilst there are a couple of areas where we've had a couple of sections of the input from specialist start and so on, the fundamental audit work waits for team to start again in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks very much, Ben. I think I probably should have asked Ola or Hamira if they had anything to say first, but if it's okay with you, Ola or Hamira, I'll hand over to you if there's anything that you wanted to say about this.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm Ola Wulabi, the Deputy Chief Finance Officer. Looking at the minutes from the November meeting where we discussed this, we resolved to call upon Deloitte to produce ISA 260 for 1920 and to come to this meeting. And we've been working with Ben and his team to get this final audit started. However, similar to what Ben has just told members, is the lack of resources, and Ben's commitment, which I'll come to later, is that hopefully from something will take place or something should start happening this month. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ola. Hamira, had you anything to add to that?
Chair, first of all, I just wish to thank Mr. Sheriff, because we do understand that they've been under immense pressure from sort of resourcing and capacity point of view. And we have committed to Mr. Sheriff and his team in terms of anything that we can do, either to facilitate an easier audit or indeed to have further discussions with his partners to make sure that he is fully supported. But that said, I think what we are aiming to do is to do quite a bit of catch up between April and September. So what we have is the finance team's full commitment to make sure that we have got our audit plan aligned to the Deloitte's resourcing, and make sure that we are presenting with a set of accounts that is going to be making their job easier. But that said, we also look forward to see more capacity and resources being put into the audit team so that this process can continue. Because I think one of the causes of the delay is this stop and start process. And every time we have got a new team who need to gain a little bit of a local knowledge, and also just by the time that they start moving on, then the time is over and they have to move on to the next project. We've had all those discussions. We are very clear about the most efficient way of addressing this problem is to make sure that there's continuity and also the capacity within the audit team to be able to deliver 2 sets of accounts by September. That is the plan. We have monthly meetings now with Mr. Sheriff and his partners, and we make sure that we do whatever we can to make sure that he's receiving the support that he needs in order to give us a much more seamless audit process this time around. But again, may I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Sheriff and his team, because it's been a difficult journey.
Thank you, Hamira, for that, and thank you, Ben, and your team for bearing with us. It must be difficult on both sides, starting from scratch, as it were, and then having various obstacles thrown in your way over the past 2 or 3 years. So I do appreciate the efforts that everybody's making, and I'm so glad to hear that you're having these monthly monitoring meetings, and things seem to be progressing now. Fingers crossed. I mean, there's always going to be there's always going to be obstacles, but I'm sure now that the strength of your working partnership is going to help overcome those as and when they arise. Before I ask if there's any comments or questions from committee members, can I welcome Councillor Chowdhury to the meeting? Councillor Chowdhury, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear Mr. Chair.
All right. First, I was just wondering whether you could, first of all, Councillor Chowdhury, introduce yourself and also let us know if you have any interest to declare in the items on the agenda tonight.
No declaration. It's Councillor Simon Chowdhury for Appendix C, and nothing to declare. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chowdhury. And so with that, I'll just invite comments and questions from other committee members if they have any to put to Ben, Homer or Ola about agenda item 8.
What do you mean? No.
Thank you all very much for that. And we now come to item 9, the external audit draft plan. Can I ask our Deputy Chief Finance Officer to present this report? Ola, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Ola Wolabi, the Deputy Chief Finance Officer. The document you've got in front of you is the external audit plan for 2021. It is the best practice to have detail in terms of what our external auditor will be doing relating to the new financial year. 31st of March is not far away, and that will be the end of 2021. And the document from Deloitte summarizes the assessment of key risk, the approach that will be taken in terms of the audit, the process in terms of determining the audit opinion on EBC accounts, and how they are going to arrive at conclusion in terms of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. In terms of fee, the fee for this audit is going to be £52,191. That has been unchanged from 1920's fee, which was agreed and set by the PSAA. In terms of key issues or key risk, I think it's normal for the external auditors to look back in terms of what they've done previously with our audit and highlight any risk that they will be looking into when in terms of the new account. And they are not unusual. It's something that every year they tend to do. I mean, a good example is going to be the completeness of the creditors. Property valuations tends to be one of the critical area. The management override of control, pensions valuations, which tends to be very, very material when you look at our account, and those are the areas they'll be looking at. However, as we know, one or two areas that the lawyers tend to focus on due to their significance tends to be the ICE accounting. So that has been identified as risk, and they'll be looking into that. Something new that was mentioned, which they'll be looking into as well, is the implication of COVID-19 financial sustainability and the accounting. And what actually brought to light as well is the ongoing MHCLG capitalization opportunity that we benefited from. And that is something that Deloitte has flagged up that they will be looking into. In terms of audit timing, the discussion we've had so far, which was made clear within their document, is that Deloitte will be making auditors available to us from 22nd of March through to the end of September. I think that is a commitment which we need to welcome. One of the main reasons is that if we can have enough resources, that will provide us with that huge opportunity to put 18-19 to bed, 19-20 to bed, and 2021 to bed. And therefore, going forward, we will be able to come to this committee at the right time. And we need to take recognition of the current changes or proposal by the government. And I've previously made a presentation to the committee about the Sir Redmond review. And one of the Sir Redmond recommendations is that we need to move the approval and the publication of the final account from July to September. And that will be implemented from this year, hopefully for the next 2 years. Definitely that will give us the opportunity, can I say, to catch up and be able to put most of the outstanding issues to bed. So therefore, we are eagerly looking forward to work with the auditors in terms of implementing everything that they've got within the external auditors plan. Can I use this opportunity to invite Ben to cover the plan itself? Thank you, Chair. Hi, Ben.
Thank you, Ola. Yes, in our plan, set out the main areas of risk and focus for our audit. Clearly, we will revisit these for any matters that emerge during the 1920 audit reflecting on this, or any matters that occur, through to the end of the year for 2021. The three areas that have already been identified as significant risks are, I think, I would say, the sort of pretty common areas for identification in a local government audit. The areas which are completeness of creditors and related expenditure, property valuations, and the risk of management override of controls. All those are required areas. The last which is a required area of risk. The areas of focus we would reassess depending on exactly what is in the position and whether any unusual items in the year. So your pension valuations, your ICE accounting, where given the complexity of it and that it is subject to fair value remeasurement on elements of the asset and liability each year, then there is going to be continuing judgment and input from your financial instrument valuers into this that we will need to look at. And there are a number of COVID-19 related matters. For value for money, our value for money work from 2021 onwards is different to the scope previously. So as I mentioned, in the past, your auditor's value for money work has terminated in the value for money conclusion in the audit report. So in the audit report, we have a conclusion whether you have appropriate arrangements in place. And that's very much a binary thing. Either an organisation does have appropriate arrangements in place, or there's a qualification in the opinion. And if there's not a qualification in the opinion, then there is often less work done because there probably hasn't been a risk or an issue. Whereas when there are issues, then the identification of a risk leads to more work, which often is you have visibility that there is a problem when you start down that road. The regulations governing what we have to do have changed this year. So the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice has changed and has moved this to seeking to have more work done in general across organisations, so that and then have an output from that, which is even if organisations have appropriate arrangements in place, they're still getting some commentary on their value for money arrangements and potentially forward-looking comments or similar. And that will be reported in a new document, the Auditor's Annual Report, which will be separate to your financial statements and will replace the annual audit letter. There is still a link back to the audit opinion because if we identify a significant weakness through that work, we would then make a recommendation to council and we would include that mention of that recommendation in our audit opinion. And the requirements for exactly how this is to be done and some of the scoping is still being determined by the National Audit Office. So some of the impact of this has not been reflected by PSAA the impact of all this has not been reflected by PSAA in their scale fee setting, and that is going to be subject of separate discussion as those requirements become finalised. there are other things in here. I've set out over a couple of pages areas from the impact of COVID where different balances are affected, and there'll be some more complexity to judgments that management will have to make in preparing the financial statements, and we've highlighted the main areas that we will look at upon this. I think that probably covers the matters within here. Yeah, I think the other area of focus mentioned is the capitalisation direction, and so the accounting and disclosure around that. Clearly, there are a small number of other authorities with capitalisation directions this year who will be making similar disclosures, but this is a less common area, and so clear disclosure and explanation of that in your financial statements will be important for communicating to residents and other users what has gone on there.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that. I think I can hand over to other members of the committee if any committee member has a comment or question they want to raise with Ben. We're now talking about the year 2021, so it's all very fresh in our minds. Anybody want to raise a point? No, I think everybody seems to be quite thrilled with everything there, Ben. So thank you very much for that. In your report here, the significant audit risks. These are significant audit risks that any external auditor would be looking at. It's not just specific to Eastbourne, I'm assuming there.
Yeah, certainly property valuations and management override. I think anyone would have the completeness of expenditure, that there is a requirement in auditing standards that there is a presumed risk of fraud in revenue recognition. And obviously for the public sector, that becomes less relevant, and you often look at expenditure instead. And we've identified that here for different bodies. You might get a different mix of whether you decide to look at a revenue risk or an expenditure risk or both. So I have a council where I have a risk that's actually around both of those. I've got others where it's an expenditure risk. There's a little bit of a mix there, and depending on the circumstances of the body, whether the pensions, for example, would be a significant risk. People take different views on, and indeed we've said we kind of reassess it when we see your year-end position, just to confirm where you fall on the line there. But there's nothing there as a significant risk that is because of some unusual worry about it.
And with Eastbourne, you've not got any problems as far as property valuation is concerned. I see that there's a once every 4 or 5 year valuation by an RICS valuer, and then there's annual desktop revaluations. I did notice that some assets are excluded, so not included in the council's revaluation process from the desktop valuations. Is this something that has arisen in Eastbourne, or is this just something you just need to check? So
there can be. I don't recall there being an issue about something being excluded that wasn't attended to in the 19 valuations, but occasionally there can be a reason for specific assets not to be. I think the context around property valuations is at March 20, which is when you had your revaluations done, and which we're still auditing. At March 20, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors had issued a valuation alert to surveyors on doing property valuations, that there was likely to be a material valuation uncertainty. So, you know, if you think about the days running up to the 31st of March last year, we were in a very uncertain time, and therefore what that meant for the reliability of the inputs into doing a property valuation and whether they were still relevant at that specific one-day point in time that you were doing a valuation, were harder. And that valuation uncertainty, they effectively left in place from mid-March. I think they put it on just before lockdown had happened, but as things were becoming, it was clear that the pandemic was spreading. So I think it was mid-March they put it on, and they withdrew the valuation notice in September. So effectively any valuations in that 6-month spell were pretty uncertain. Now, what that means is the March 20 accounts have in them a material valuation uncertainty disclosure in your critical judgment estimates and judgments, and my audit opinion will have an emphasis matter drawing attention to that. So I will not have a normal clean opinion as a result. You now play forward to March 21, where you're not having a full revaluation done, but you're having a desktop update, but you're having an update to something which was an uncertain position, and therefore your valuers probably have to think a little bit harder in doing that update than they would normally do, because they're starting from a slightly less certain point that they've been looking at last time. And it may well be that for half your properties, actually sort of subsequent facts show that they'd hit a pretty solid position. And for other things, there have been quite big movements since what they'd assumed before, some up, some down, and they may need to think about it a little bit more for certain categories of property. But we're not as positive as many things going on in the world, in the UK at the moment around the pandemic and so on are. We still have a month to run to the end of the year. That's the date they're doing this at, and it has been a year with huge movements in most markets over the course of it in both directions. So exactly where that will land is something that they will be forming a view on in a month's time.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. I don't know whether there's any other members of the committee got anything. So I do see Councillor Taylor's hand up. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you brought up the issue of property valuation. I think it's starting to bother me now. And will we in the future be able to get a list of properties and their evaluation so that we know where we stand? Because I don't know, everybody seems to be getting very nervous about property valuations, especially any acquisitions that Eastbourne Borough Council may have moved into. So can I ask the question, will we be able to give a list of the properties and the evaluations? Thank you.
I suppose that would be directed to Ola, and Ola's there with his hand up. Thank you, Ola.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Ola Wolabi, the Deputy Chief Finance Officer. I think my response to that is yes, if the committee want to see that list. The requirement under the technical accounting code is that we need to value our property and making sure whatever we've got with the balance sheet is the true and fair view of all those property. What we did in 1920 is actually, as a result of COVID and everything, to revalue all our properties, everything. However, going forward from now on, what we will do then is to have some sort of rolling program where every three years we want to make sure we carry out those valuations. However, there are some certain assets, like surplus asset that we might want to sell or dispose. There might be investment that we might want to do something with. All those ones, we need to have them valued every year because we have to show the fair value on our balance sheet. However, because we are now going into rolling program, it doesn't mean that we are ignoring the other asset that we are not valuing. What we tend to do with that then is that the valuer will provide us with what they call an impairment review report. And that impairment review is an opportunity to now update everything, maybe by indices or by a certain percentage. So therefore, we everything will be bring up in line with everything we've got within our asset. I think in terms of our policy, we just want to make sure we are going to do a rolling program, maybe twice or thrice, and then we will evaluate everything. By doing that, that will ensure we have the latest and the most up-to-date information within our balance sheet. However, coming back to your question, if at the end of any particular year, you want to see the list of all our assets, that is something I'm happy to provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ola. I think that also you covered the point I'd raised with Ben earlier on, Ben, that you're not valuing, doing desktop valuations of every asset every year. So some of those are excluded. I mean, I think it's a very good point Councillor Taylor brings up there. So long as there's no reason, no sort of commercial sensitivity or anything that Humira or yourself, Ola, could see. I mean, I don't see why that information shouldn't be in. I mean, could it be in the public arena, or would it just have to be amongst members of this committee? Humira, thank you.
I think, Chairman, you probably touched upon the point that I was going to raise. When it comes to our investment portfolio, I think we need to be sensitive to their commerciality. I think in terms of transparency, we can accommodate the list of valuation. But I also made a reference to something that has already been covered by Ola and Mr. Sheriff, and that is the fact that valuation that we carry out on annual basis, either desktop or actual fair value valuation. These are for a given point in time, and effectively when we have got a greater interest or determination in either making investments or disposing of our assets, then that far more greater detailed work goes into determining fair value and also what is the value for money outcome for the authority. So I think there are kind of, if you like, the accounting requirements to make sure that we have got a balance sheet that provides a fair value at that given point. But then we do have a process to achieve value for money, and that is much more in line with type of assets that we have targeted either for disposal or for acquisition.
Thank you, Humira. Councillor Taylor, I mean, have you got anything specific that you'd like to request of the officers as far as that's concerned?
Not really. I think the danger is that we tend to, if we're not careful, is to overvalue property and therefore have a false sense of security, if you like, in the fact that property prices or the valuation is going up, when we should be very cautious and make sure that if for some reason the property value is going down or it's beyond its possibility of its income. And I think we need to be aware of that. You can disguise, if you're not careful, you can disguise a lot of money involved in the fact that you don't disclose the true value. All right, that's all really, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor. I mean, I think this is probably something that external auditors would be very, very keen on checking that it was all done in be waring of overvaluation, bumping up the balance. But Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, property valuations is an area that, say, we've identified as a significant risk. It is something where we use our property valuation specialists, so chartered surveyors within our firm, to review and challenge that, because they are much better placed to look at inputs coming from your valuers, Hawkshead and Even, to review and challenge that than I am. You know, it is a specialist area, and we use appropriate specialists to do that. And we had also fed back comments from the work we'd done previously on areas where they could include greater clarity on their assumptions and information in their reports to allow us to better get into that, and hopefully taking those on board in reports they prepare next time for this. So, it is something we look at pretty closely.
Thanks, Ben. Councillor Chowdhury, I was just wondering whether you you had any questions you'd want to put to the officers or to Ben.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chowdhury. Before we wrap that agenda item up, we had a discussion, Ben, about the fact that it's a special year for us because we've got three sets of accounts coming up, hopefully this year. And September seems to be a popular month for everything after watching the budget. Everything's going to happen by September. So I briefly covered it earlier on, but I had discussions with Ola about it and about the possibility of setting three meeting dates, each one to discuss and for you to be able to present your report, to rather than having 3 years of accounts all in one, have three separate. And I certainly am very grateful for Deloitte being able to increase its resources to enable this to happen. So we're all very appreciative of the work you've done in securing that from the 22nd of March. So we had thought, if it's possible, we could space these meetings out, subject to it filling in with yourself, to have one in May, one in July, and one in September, I think, Ola. Was that correct?
Correct, Chair. Yes.
So how does that sound to you, Ben?
Yeah, I think that sounds so. In principle, that sounds fine. I think I mentioned in the paper, the September is what MHCLG has put out in their consultation, so it's not quite their finalised timing position. And I think your calendar has a meeting currently on the 1st of September, which may or may not quite fit with time of this, because there's one of.
Yeah, we'd look to move that to the end of September.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think we probably need to for that bit to both see that things are progressing on the work, which depends on quality of what we receive and issues identified in testing, and hopefully that will all be fine and go to plan, and also wherein MHCLG finalise. And I would hope, given it is the 3rd of March and your year end is the 31st of March, that MHCLG will fairly soon finalise the result of their consultation and the national timetable. But I know there have been comments on that timetable overall. So it may move from that, obviously consistent with Redmond's goal of the long-term answer of what the timetables are.
Thanks, Ola.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Ben, is just to reinforce the message from the Chair. I mean, the thinking at the moment is that with 1819, we are nearly there. It's not too far away. Within the next few weeks, we should be able to draw a line under that, and that can either go to April or May meeting. However, because we've got your team on site, when I say on site, probably remotely using the team, there will be opportunity to now sort out 1920, and that will go to the already scheduled July meeting. And while they are on site as well, I'm sure they will be casting their eyes on 2021, and then that will go into the September meeting. And I think you make a good point earlier in terms of MHCLG not confirming September. If that is the case, we will probably revisit our timing and calendar, unless you can assure the members that if that is the case, you will be able to complete the 1920 and 2021 by July meeting, which we will say thank you to you.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it is not talk about, particularly because we're talking about, this is a discussion about Eastbourne, but clearly our resourcing and team that is doing testing for Eastbourne is also doing testing for neighbouring council with the same team, and so the fair answer for each is not to do all of one in first. So I don't think that 2021 is not. I don't see what would happen for July anyway. I mean, even if other things went the way, I don't think that would be sensible at all. So
yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Ben. So can we? I get from that, from the discussion we've just had, that Ben is pretty sure that we can have a meeting in April, May, for 18-19. July seems good for 19-20. If we could pencil in or put the meeting in from the 1st of September towards the end of September. If there is a problem, fingers crossed there won't be, there is a meeting scheduled for November. So who will be sorting the meeting dates out? Would it be Elaine?
Yes, I've had a discussion with Elaine. Okay. Elaine, might want to come on?
Yes, Elaine Roberts, committee officer. Yes, certainly, I will look to liaise with Ola, and as things progress with Deloitte, we hopefully can get those meeting dates, something sorted if we find that those reports do come through in that timetable as we're all hoping.
That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Elaine. So with that. The committee is recommended to consider and comment upon the external audit plan. I think we've commented already, and we have considered it. I think with that and with the other councillors' blessings, I'm quite happy to pass our thanks on to Ben in particular, and also Paul Thomas, who both joined us from Deloitte and coming to this meeting, and for the work that they've been doing and presenting the updates, and thank you very much for that, and feel free to leave the meeting now and get on with catching up with other things in the world.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for coming. Good to see you. And with that, we'd move on to item 10, which is a annual report on the use and governance of covert surveillance powers, and it's Lee Ewan. Over to you, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Lee Ewan, I'm the Counter Fraud Investigations Manager and also the RIPA Monitoring Officer. I'm here to provide a sort of overview of the Covert Surveillance Powers annual report. In summary, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act provides provisions for the local authority, such as ourselves, to take the opportunity really to use covert powers where there is a offence which is likely to meet six months prison sentence effectively. Now, as we are a borough council, these are provisions and powers that we're probably not likely to use very often, and only really fit within certain offences such as subletting of a council property, such as fly tipping, or, for example, something like a right to buy fraud. So quite significant cases, so only something that we're likely to be able to use on very sort of limited occasions. Whereas that the power is there, in terms of the usage, we have to take into account that this has significant implications on individuals' privacy, and also the wider potential sort of community within that area if certain surveillance mechanisms are used or utilised. For that purpose and for that reason, we really would only want to use this for an extreme and only where nothing else is possible. This is in the public interest, is something that needs to be resolved, and therefore this is an option that we would consider to use. Where we have a certain stringent sort of controls in place, which RIPA basically forces us to do in accordance with the legislation. The application process itself involves an officer investigating an offence under the requirement for it to be 6 months. This is then sort of passed through to a monitoring officer, such as myself, to review, to see if it's the proportionality necessity, and then a authorising officer, a senior officer within the council, then looks at the application and looks again for proportionality, necessity, and if it's in the public interest. If that's it could be authorised and then passed through again to magistrate, justice of the peace, to look at and consider. If that again is deemed appropriate, it can then be authorised, and we can then take action in terms of covert surveillance. So there's quite a lot involved in the process itself, both in consideration of why we want to use these powers, what reason we would want to apply them, and of course the controls in place to make sure that this is not powers which are abused by authorities across the country. So therefore, and it's unsurprising, I suppose, in a year that we've had, in terms of the annual report, there is no instance that we need to sort of make you aware of. What we also need to consider, though, as everyone is working from home, and there's the sort of the issues that are involved in not so RIPA but non-RIPA activity. When I say non-RIPA, RIPA itself involves the offence requiring to be a 6-month prison sentence. There's also matters in which a council or local authorities such as ourselves may want to consider degrees of surveillance which don't meet that criteria. So for us, that perhaps would be things such as debt collection of non-payment of council tax, business rates, rents, those sorts of areas. What we have got is enforced policies and procedures in place internally, which are there to make sure that if there is a consideration for such as a debt collection sort of process or something along those lines, to follow the same remit as RIPA itself, i.e. if we're likely to look at doing online surveillance of an individual, we will then apply the same sort of method as that there would be proportionality necessity applied. Again, it should be something which is done as a last resort. And again, it needs to be some sort of internal approval system, which again is to prevent abuse of kind of the powers, and also to protect impact on individuals and their privacy. The policy itself, obviously, I've noted here on the report, and I am happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lee. Does any councillor have any questions they want to raise with Lee? Councillor Chowdhury, do you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask?
No, I haven't got any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of little ones, Lee, from me. The JP obviously is involved at the outset. Is the JP involved at all during this process, or do you need to report back at the end of the exercise?
Thank you, Chair. Lee, the process itself, if an application is authorised, we have a responsibility to constantly monitor if it's appropriate and proportionate to continue with any sort of surveillance. And if there comes a point in which, for example, if an application has been granted for, say, 2 or 3 months, and after a period of time we realise that is probably no longer necessary because the case doesn't warrant it, then we would need to contact them appropriately and sort of advise them accordingly. So that may not necessarily be the same person, but there is a structure there in place for us to monitor it and also report back if it's appropriate to continue with any activities that we're undertaking.
Thanks, Lee. And is there a route of complaint or grievance if the subject of your surveillance or someone else has a grievance or complaint about the way it's been carried out? Is there a route down which people can go?
Thank you, Lee. Yes, there is. The Information Commissioner's Office are independent, and they provide an avenue for individuals or businesses or anyone in particular, if they wish to raise a concern or a breach of anything that they feel has been taken or abused, or powers that have been sort of used when they shouldn't be. They also conduct annual reviews of local authorities and in regards to our sort of activity, and also to look at our internal mechanisms and controls that we have in place. Recent report was complimentary as to how we have sort of conducted ourselves, but that is that they are the independent sort of process there for us to for any individuals that may wish to raise it as an issue to them, and they have the power to all sorts of various powers, I think, to implement or sort of recommendations that we need to adhere to. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Lee. In the absence of any other comments, I'd like to thank you very much for that presentation, Lee. The committee, we need to note the report. So if everybody's happy to note the report, I'm happy. So thanks very much again, Lee. Thank you. That takes us on to agenda item 11, and that's the draft internal audit plan for 2021-22, and it's from Jackie Humphrey. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you very much, Chair. Jackie Humphrey, Chief Internal Auditor. So my first report of the evening is the draft annual plan for 2021. At this time of year, we have to look at what we will be auditing in the next financial year. Over the years, we've noticed that having a very strict, distinct plan agreed at the beginning of the year was either a little too rigid, or it meant we were always coming and reporting that we hadn't quite finished the plan because other things had come up. So we were looking at a way of being more flexible and yet being able to do the work that we needed to do. We need to do enough work so that at the end of the financial year, when I give my opinion on the control environment across the council, we've done breadth of coverage across the council. So we looked at a different way of doing it, which we actually started last year, where we took all the different areas of the council, worked out what percentage of the council as a whole they were, and we've split our time in audit accordingly. So we know that we're doing the amount of audit time in that area is a percentage of the council as a whole, and that ensures we've got the breadth of coverage. So what I've brought here is a plan based on that split of coverage, and we've looked at our audit universe, which is a list of all the areas across the council that we can audit. We've looked at high risk areas. There are certain areas that we have to do annually anyway, so we have to take those into account. Plus we've looked at issues that are quite relevant at the moment as well. So if we look at Appendix B of the draft audit plan there, you will see at the top we have the percentages and then the days of audit we intend to spend on the different areas. And then underneath that, we have got the areas that we are suggesting we will look at. This plan is what we will audit if nothing else comes up. So by doing it this way, this allows us to be flexible. If something comes up during the year that really needs us looking at and it wasn't in the plan, we can look at that area, say, yes, we will replace this audit for this one. We will, of course, inform you that we're doing that, but as I say, it allows us to be flexible. However, we have looked at areas that are important and made sure we've got those in this year. So you will notice that there are some audits around COVID. So we will be looking at how we dealt with furloughing. We will be looking at HR policies with our new ways of working, with so many people working from home. We're also looking at cybersecurity during COVID to make sure that all those things were covered. But then we've also borne in mind that the council has a green agenda. So we are looking at things, I'm trying to find it now, pollution we're looking at. And so we've tried to bear all those things in mind. So as I say, this is our plan of what we will do if nothing else comes up. As you can imagine, with tourism and enterprise, the current financial year we're in, that sort of went by the board because nothing was happening in tourism. So we're hoping to catch up on that next year as things open. We'll be able to go in and audit them. So really, this is me bringing the report to you and the draft plan and saying, are you happy with how we've done it? Are there any areas you think we haven't included that you think we should look at? And if you have no comments, just asking you to agree the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jackie. I'll hand over to committee members if they'd like to raise a comment or question for Jackie. Councillor Taylor.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Yes, actually, it was interesting because I was quite surprised that you would need to spend so much time on service delivery and corporate services. And in the report, I was pleased to find that there's quite a lot of issues, quite a lot of items within service delivery and corporate services. I was quite surprised at that, but because when I first saw the first section where it said there was 125 rounded days for both those issues, but there's quite a lot involved there. So, yep, no, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. Just thought I'd mention that because it was something going through the report that I was. I thought that was rather excessive, but it obviously isn't.
Sorry, Chair, could I just come in? I've just realised I missed something in my haste of talking about the audit plan. I missed the counter fraud part completely, so I have to apologise to Lee because he's still on the line. I'm sorry. The second part of the report does go into the areas of work that counter fraud are doing. They're still working on their usual areas of tenancy fraud, council tax and council tax reduction, disabled facility grants. The biggest area of work for them at the moment, though, is post-verification work on COVID grants, and of course that will be moving over into the new year as well. So apologies that I didn't mention that. Apologies to Lee as well, but I just needed to point that out to you as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jackie. The percentage of universe, as you call it, I assume this is quite a fluid thing, and it may change from year to year.
Yes, Jackie Humphrey, Chief Internal Auditor. Thank you, Chair. Yes, it does, in a sense. When changes happen, sometimes you will find a piece of work moves from one department to another. So things are fluid in that way. If we stop doing a piece of work or start doing another piece of work, it will. So literally all we've done is said what work goes on in service delivery. So you've got all of housing under there, you've got all of the neighbourhood first things under there as well, and of course with corporate services it's all of the back office stuff. So there's a lot of areas around the finance things, there's a lot of things we need to keep an eye on in there, so that's why those two are so large. And yes, it does look disproportionate, but when you really drill down and think what's in those areas, that's why it's that way.
Oh, thanks. I mean, although you're very flexible in your approach here, there's going to be similar weighting to those areas as because of the areas that they cover, I suppose. So it's not really going to change a great deal, is it?
No.
Councillor Chowdhury, I was just wondering whether you had any questions or comments to raise with Jackie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Chowdhury. So our role is to consider and to agree the proposed plan. Are we all in agreement? Yes, I think we are. So Jackie, yes, I'm quite happy to say we agree the proposed plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
And that now takes us on to agenda item 12, which is the internal audit and counter fraud report for the first 3 quarters of the financial year 2021 to the end of December 20, and that again is from Jackie Humphrey. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. Jackie Humphrey, Chief Internal Auditor. Yes, as the Chair said, this is our report on the work of audit and counter fraud during the first 3 quarters of the year. On page 24, 2.1, you will see the list of audits that we've issued in final during those 3 quarters and the assurance level that we've given them. Where they have been given an assurance level of partial or minimal, you will find in Appendix A the list and bullet points of the reasons why we gave them the assurance level that we did. The one to point out really is the business continuity planning, which is a minimal assurance one. I do need to say with that though, that corporate management team were very clear that I needed to caveat it, and they're quite right, that it isn't saying that we can't do business continuity. I think as the council proved with COVID hitting, we did very well at it. We hit the ground running and we've addressed all the things that have come to us. What we didn't have were written business continuity plans, and that's what we were looking for. So the audit went in and said, have you got a written business continuity plan? And we found that a lot of areas didn't. So it isn't that we can't do business continuity, it was just that we hadn't got it documented. And again, it's one of those areas, it's given minimal assurance, but it only requires a business continuity plan to be written and the assurance level goes back up. Then at 2.3, we just listed the audits that we had out in draft at the time as well, so that you can see all the work that we've done. At the time of writing this report, we had 2 posts that were vacant. We were allowed to fill one. We interviewed. We had the new person come in mid-January, and they are already up and running, working. So that's bringing us really back up to speed, which is good. And we have 2 members of the team who are undertaking audit apprenticeship training at the moment. As I said, last year was the first year we started trying doing this flexible audit plan. It worked for us with COVID in that it enabled us to be a bit more flexible, but with all the restrictions of COVID, it actually worked against us because, as I say, we'd planned to do 9% of our time on tourism and enterprise, and of course tourism just shut down, so we weren't able to do that. But hopefully at my next quarterly report, we'll be able to show you exactly the percentages that we did, and it should be roughly what we'd planned to do. And then moving on to the work of counter fraud, as I say, they've been doing a lot of work. They've been quite flexible, but also, even though they haven't been able to go out and do some of the visits that they'd normally do, they've still been doing a range of work. So they've still been working on housing tenancy, they've still been working on right to buy, although as you can imagine, the number of applications on that went down. They've been working on housing options, NNDR, council tax, housing benefits, housing debtors. But the big piece of work was really around the small business grants and the post-verification work on there. The team's been doing an awful lot of work, and I have to say that you may have seen in the local paper about a gym that was closed, and our team worked quite closely with the police on sorting that out. So they've been doing a really vital piece of work there. And at Appendix C is the table showing the savings of the team. I always have to caveat that although those figures look very high, the figures we really need to focus on are the ones that are the income savings, because they are money that we can either get back in or we can try and get back in. The savings are mostly nominal amounts of money that we've stopped going out of the door. So they're just indicative of what's been saved. That's the end of my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you very much to your team for doing such a great job. And you filled one of the posts, and you've still 1 post yet to fill in the internal audit team. Yes, I will need to do some negotiations on that post. All right, yeah, but you've done very well. Thank you very much for that. I'll hand over to other members of the committee. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only to say what you've already said, actually, thanks to Jackie, because I think her team is working very hard, and I've got no comment at all. Or I think they've done excellently, and I'm surprised that they're doing so much under the circumstances. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Chowdhury, do you have a comment or question you wish to raise?
No, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chowdhury. If there's no other, I've got to make sure I've got the right one here. That was item
12.
12. Sorry, that's sorry, because you're doing so many tonight, Jackie. Again, so the recommendation to committee is that the information in the report be noted, and members identify any further information requirements. So, are we all happy with that? Thank you all very much, and thank you, Jackie, very much for that, and to your team for doing a sterling job. So item 13, and that is the Strategic Risk Register Quarterly Review, and that's Jackie Humphrey again. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, Jackie Humphrey, Chief Internal Auditor. So this is the quarterly review of the Strategic Risk Register. I bring it to the committee when we've made any changes or if you particularly ask to see it. So I took the Strategic Risk Register to the corporate management team in January to review the risk levels and the risks that were noted on there. It was noted that there was no specific mention of the financial impact of COVID. It does, a lot of the risks do sit under one of those 8, even if they're not specifically mentioned, they do sit there. But because COVID had been such a big thing, it was decided that there should be a specific mention of it. So under the second risk, which is changes to the economic environment to make the council economically less stable, a description has been added which reads COVID-19 has had a serious impact on the council's finances, and an internal control has been added, which is to do with the discussions with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So that's the only change that has been made to the risk register itself. And the only other thing I would point out, it was flagged up with me quite rightly, but we have a reason for it, is risk number 9 about the commercial enterprises. The original risk score is a likelihood of 3 and an impact of 4. But the current risk score is a 5 and a 5. Now, normally you should not put your current risk score higher than your original risk score. The reason we have done it is because the current situation, we really are in new territory. Nobody quite understands where this is going or how it might impact on us. So because we literally do not know, we've put it up to the highest risk score so that it's flagged as a high risk. And then once we're in a better position to understand where we are, we can look at reducing that risk again. So I just thought I'd flag that up and point out why we've done that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much again, Jackie. I'll hand over to members of the committee if they've got any questions or comments they'd like to make. Oh, yep, Councillor Taylor.
Only just that when I looked at the report, I was quite surprised there was 5 items that are in red, which is quite a high risk. And you know, in one of them actually, I think. Let me just get, it mentions, and I think it follows on, against the type of challenge significant. No, there was one about delegated issues being delegated to the officers, and it seemed perhaps Jackie, you could. I'm just trying to find it. I saw it in when I was reading it out earlier. But maybe I've lost where it was.
I think you are talking about risk number 11. Judicial challenge of decision making is heightened as a consequence of increased reliance on the use of officer delegated powers. Yeah, that's to do with these meetings and being online. and any issues that may happen. It was a specific request by our previous monitoring officer that this be put in, because if we have IT issues and people don't hear what is being said or agreed, it could cause challenge.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. It's very, very difficult. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just it's not unexpected to see some issues coming up in red, but you're doing a grand job, I'm sure.
So thank you, Councillor Taylor, and certainly I'd echo those. The number of 25s is to be expected, and thank you very much, Jackie, for doing such a very good job with this the risk register. It's very comprehensive, and you've done a great job, you and your team. So thank you very much. Thank you. We just need to, before you go, well, the recommendation is to receive and note the update to the strategic risk register. So is everybody happy with that?
Yes, I'm happy.
Very good. Thank you very much, councillors, and thank you again, Jackie. Fantastic job you and your team are doing, and very good reports tonight, and brought across in a way that we can all understand, and thank you very much again. And so take care, and we'll move on to item number 14. Thank you. And that's arrangements for dealing with complaints about councillor conduct report, and it's a report of the monitoring officer, Oliver Dixon. Oliver, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you, and good evening, members. I'm Oliver Dixon, the monitoring officer for Eastbourne Borough Council, and this evening's report is really just about rectifying a minor issue with the council's arrangements for dealing with complaints about councillor conduct. And this report really came about from when I took over as monitoring officer towards the end of last year. I became aware that the council had no formal written procedures for dealing with complaints about member conduct. Up until then, any complaints, and there weren't many, but when a complaint did arise, the monitoring officer would handle it informally with the member concerned or through their group leader, and more often than not, it was successfully resolved that way. That worked very well in practice, but I'm just concerned about a potential lack of transparency, and I really would wish to introduce an arrangement that is if you like, more open to lack transparency, and is more consistent and can't be accused of being unfair. The law on this, which comes from the Localism Act, is quite brief in what it prescribes. It merely requires councils such as ours to have arrangements in place to investigate complaints and to decide them. How the council goes about that is really a matter for itself, other than the need to involve the independent person at two specific stages. So I think the pragmatic solution, and is what I've recommended in the report, is for the council simply to replicate the written procedures that exist in Lewis, that I'm very familiar with, and they work. So the three documents you have, Appendices 1, 2 and 3 in your report, really just comprise the full process from start to finish, which very briefly would involve an initial assessment by me as the monitoring officer to decide whether the complaint can and should be investigated. Stage 2 would be a formal investigation if that is warranted, and stage 3 would be resolution of that complaint, which, depending on the seriousness of the issue, may involve a hearing of the council's standards panel, which in fact is a subcommittee of your committee. As I mentioned, our independent person, I think you've met Neil Robinson and Graham Branton. They have to be involved at one particular stage in the proceedings, and that is that if we get to the point where either I or standards panel is deciding whether a member has breached the code of conduct, then the independent person must be consulted at that point. We actually go further than that, and even at the initial assessment in terms of whether the complaint warrants investigation, I always take the view of our independent person before proceeding. Chair, the only, if you like, upgrade of Lewis's arrangements that I'm recommending this evening just takes account of something that the Committee on Standards in Public Life wanted all authorities to do, which is at the initial assessment of a complaint stage, that the arrangements are completely clear about the criteria the monitoring officer applies as to whether a complaint should or should not be investigated. And that includes public interest factors, which for us are primarily about time, effort, cost involved in a full-blown investigation. Because if I purely for illustration and from previous experience, if we do commission a full and formal investigation by an external body, that can cost in excess of £5,000. So we've got to balance that against the seriousness of the complaint. Two very final points, Chair. One is that what I'm recommending to you this evening is only about the way we deal with complaints. This is nothing to do with the code of conduct itself. I'm not proposing any amendments to that. And then my ultimate point is that should you deem it fit to accept these arrangements, then they will come into effect immediately, because as a committee, it's within your remit to agree this, and there's no need to refer the matter to full council. So, Chair, thanks. That concludes my submission, and clearly I'm happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Oliver. I'll hand over to committee members if they've got a question or comment they'd like to make. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Oliver. The only question I think you've actually answered was the fact, was there any basic change in the code of conduct as we know it? But obviously there isn't. Which parts are coming in line with Lewis when you said that you're trying to bring this in? What were the differences, if you like?
I think in practice there were probably very few differences. It's just that under the previous monitoring officer, they weren't documented, and that's just a slight risk that I'm seeking to address here. I think, because I must pay tribute actually to the previous monitoring officer, in that because over a long period of time he had developed a very an excellent working relationship with individual members and with group leaders. If a complaint arose, he was very adept at resolving that at source, rather than having to sort of invoke formal procedures. But, you know, hypothetically, a serious case could arise, in which case I would need to resort to an established and agreed process. So it's just one element of governance which I think we just need to ensure we've got.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I thank you very much for that, Oliver, because I think I was very used to the fact that the last monitor officer used to always be able to, in some ways, work with the group leader and resolve very often things. So thanks ever so much for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Thank you, Oliver. Councillor Chowdhury, have you any questions or comments you'd like to raise? Thank you, Councillor. I mean, I was surprised when you'd said that there were no real written procedures for dealing with investigations into councillor conduct, and so I think it makes a great deal of sense to be in line with Lewes District Council with their written procedures, and also because of the need for transparency and to standardise it, to make it more consistent. So everybody, it gives you as monitoring officer and other people involved a little bit more confidence in what you're doing, because you know, and obviously you've been involved with Lewes as well. So I'm a big supporter of this. And I noticed in recommendation 3 that we delegate authority to the monitoring officer to make any amendments as may occur as a result of legislation or what was the other one? Or best practice. So obviously that's something that we'll consider in a few minutes. I would just like to ask on that, though. Obviously, this is a new thing and for Eastbourne. I mean, probably Lewes is used to it, but these procedures ultimately need tweaking from time to time because of the change in legislation, but also in the way they work. And you think, oh God, that didn't work very well. Let's just change that. And so I'm quite happy for us to delegate that authority to you as well. I mean, that's just me personally. Obviously, we'll all. But so long as we touch base about it, so long as you're able to let us know, and so we can discuss it, and you're able to bring your reasons to the committee, so we understand the need for those changes.
Absolutely, yeah, yes, quite happy to give you that assurance, Chair. I mean, I chose my wording in recommendation 3 quite carefully to qualify any amendments, to say that it would only be administrative or technical amendments. So if there were very minor changes that were needed, perhaps based on best practice elsewhere, then to save the bother of a report to committee and a long lead-in period, I would just use my discretion to introduce them. I always report them offline to you as chair. But my other assurance is that if there were any substantive amendment, which particularly where any change might possibly disadvantage a member who is the subject of a complaint, then it's really important that as a committee you have an opportunity to comment on that before it's introduced. So these procedures really are there for the assurance both of the person complaining and the member complained of, so that there is, as you said, transparency about procedures, and it's seen as being fair to both. And we're perhaps a good example of review would be next week in Lewes. There's a meeting of their standards panel to determine a code of conduct issue, and I and the deputy monitoring officer afterwards, as a learning exercise, will review how the procedures worked in practice, and if we feel that there's something we could improve on, we will seek to implement them through these arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Councillor Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Oliver, for presenting this to us. Can I ask if a copy of these arrangements could be sent to all members, please?
Yeah, yes, it's a very good suggestion. I'll do that. The other place where they will be accessible is on the council's website. But yeah, I think as a result of this evening, assuming you go ahead to agree these recommendations, I'll arrange for a link to be sent to each Eastbourne member, because of course it's a new development for you and your fellow members.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very good point, Councillor Metcalfe. Thank you very much, and thank you, Oliver, for that. So, if no one has anything else to say, I'd move on to the recommendations, and I'll read through the recommendations. And Councillor Chowdhury, I'll come to you at the very end of reading through these, just to check your agreement or not. So the recommendations are: number one, that the committee approve the procedure for dealing with complaints about councillor conduct as set out in Appendix 1. Number two is that the committee approve the investigation procedure and hearings procedure set out in Appendices 2 and 3 respectively. And then number three, that the committee grant delegated authority, as Oliver has explained, to the monitoring officer to make any administrative or technical amendments to the above procedures necessary to ensure ongoing compliance with the law and best practice. So are we all agreed with those three recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Chowdhury, are you okay with those three recommendations? Thank you very much. So well, then we're all happy with that. Thank you very much, Oliver, for your presentation, and I think it's a very sensible move to make. So thank you very much. That brings us on to item 15, which is the date of next meeting, which we don't know, because Elaine is going to decide that and agree that with Ben Sheriff from Deloitte. Hopefully, well, I mean, it will be May at the latest, but it'll be either April or May, election time allowing. So we'll have to bear that in mind, but I'm sure Elaine will be aware of that. So, so with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much for attending. Thank you all the officers who've presented, and also all officers who've attended in the background, and certainly to Elaine Roberts for organising this. And I close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman. Bye.